It's time for the Ghoulie Girls.
A charming Bavarian-style house located on Easton Drive in Benedict Canyon. It became home to Hollywood's original bombshell, Jean Harlow, when she married producer Paul Bern. What was intended to be a life of bliss instead turned out to be a life of tragedy. It's believed that the spirits of Harlow and Bern have remained there. Decades later, the spirits of the Harlow-Bern home would show a warning to an up-and-coming actress who would become victim of Hollywood's most horrific murder. Jean Harlow was born on March 3, 1911 in Kansas City, Missouri. Her name was actually Harleen Harlow Carpenter, but all her life she would simply go by her nickname, the Baby. Harleen was known to be a sweet and caring person. She was still in her teens when she married Charles McGrew. Just after a year of being married, the young couple moved to Los Angeles in hopes of starting a family. Harleen only ever wanted the simple life of being a good wife and mother. However, fate would intervene, and while giving a ride to a friend to Fox Studios, Harleen was discovered by Fox executives who urged her to sign with Central Casting. Initially, she wasn't interested, but with her mother's encouragement and her friend daring her on a wager, Harleen eventually signed with Central Casting and used her mother's maiden name, Jean Harlow. It wasn't long before she started getting cast in bit parts. By 1928, she was given a 5-year contract with Hal Roach Studios, where she would appear in a few Laurel and Hardy films. Jean Harlow grew to love acting, but her success was beginning to cause a rift in her marriage. In an attempt to save her marriage, she expressed to Hal Roach that her acting was causing problems between her and her husband. The angry producer ripped her contract and released her from doing any future films with him. And unfortunately, there was no salvaging her marriage. She and McGrew divorced anyway, and she continued to find work as an extra. Her big breakthrough came right after, when director Howard Hughes was in the process of converting his silent film, Hell's Angels, into a talkie. Hughes was on the scout to find a replacement for The Leading Lady, which was originally played by Norwegian actress Greta Nielsen, whose strong accent wasn't transferring well into this new format. Hughes was impressed with Harlow's screen test and gave her the role as well as a 5-year contract. The film skyrocketed Harlow's career into stardom, and the role established her as a bona fide sex symbol. She then starred in Public Enemy opposite James Cagney and The Secret Six along with Clark Gable. It would be the first of 6 films she would be paired with Gable in. Harlow began a romantic affair with MGM executive Paul Bern, who was 20 years her senior. Bern played a pivotal role in ensuring that MGM buy Harlow out of her contract with Howard Hughes. As the relationship became more serious, friends and family felt that they made an odd pair and didn't understand what the attraction was. But despite people's judgment, Harlow married Bern in July 1932. The couple lived in a charming Bavarian-style home in Benedict Canyon, where their wedding ceremony took place. The honeymoon phase didn't last long. The marriage was turbulent due to Bern's physical abuse of Harlow. Even before they were married, there had been rumors that Bern was sexually impotent or a latent homosexual. Harlow began filming her next movie, Red Dust, alongside Clark Gable. After a heated argument with Bern, Harlow went to stay with Mother Jean. On September 5, 1932, Bern was found dead at their home. Their butler had discovered the deceased body in their bathroom. He was nude with a bullet hole in his head. Although his death would ultimately be ruled as suicide, it was apparent that it was foul play, with Harlow initially being the one suspected of killing him. To avoid scandal, MGM executives had people sent to the crime scene to make sure it looked like it was self-inflicted. Authorities discovered a note supposedly written by Bern that read, "Dearest dear, unfortunately, this is the only way to make good the frightful wrong I have done you and to wipe out any abject humiliation. I love you, Paul. You understand that last night was only a comedy." They also discovered that the night of his death, Bern was paid a visit by his common-law wife, Dorothy Millette, who coincidentally took her own life 2 days later by jumping from the Delta King steamboat. Millette had for years suffered from mental and emotional health, which caused her to end up in a sanatorium. Most believe that Millette is guilty of the murder and that it was about money. Jean Harlow was devastated by the whole ordeal and even attempted to take her own life. Harlow's only statement on the matter was that she knew nothing. She paid the expenses for both Bern's and Millette's funerals. The studio was still very wary that the scandal would ruin her upcoming feature and even considered refilming Red Dust with a different actress. But the scandal proved to have no bearing on her movie career. Red Dust was a success, and her next films, Dinner at 8 and Bombshell, would go on to be amongst some of her most popular films. To maintain a clean image, the studio arranged for Harlow to marry cinematographer Harold Rawson. The marriage only lasted 8 months. She then fell in love with actor William Powell, whom she considered to be the love of her life. Although Powell was devoted to her, he was adamant about not wanting to get married. By 1937, Harlow's health began to decline. After a visit to the White House for a fundraiser, Harlow contracted influenza, and filming for her next movie, Saratoga, had to be delayed after she developed sepsis caused by her wisdom teeth being extracted. Shortly after filming started, Harlow began to experience symptoms of fatigue and nausea, and co-stars noticed that she was beginning to look pale and swollen. The studio doctor diagnosed it to be influenza, and a doctor who was called to Harlow's home for treatment diagnosed it to be inflamed gallbladder. As her symptoms worsened, another doctor was called to give a second opinion. The doctor detected that she was in the final stages of kidney failure. On the evening of June 6, 1937, Harlow was finally taken to the hospital, where she slipped into a coma and passed away the following morning. She was only 26 years old. Following the unfortunate deaths of Harlow and Bern, people who have lived in their former home have said to experience supernatural occurrences that they believe to be the apparitions of Harlow and Bern. Amongst some of the home's later owners includes actress Sally Forrest, who also believe that the home is haunted by Harlow and Bern. She and her husband purchased the home in 1955, and in the mid-60s they rented the home to celebrity stylist J. Sebring. Sebring was renowned for his innovative methods of cutting and styling men's hair. His celebrity clients include Paul Newman, Warren Beatty, Steve McQueen, and Frank Sinatra, just to name a few. In October 1964, Sebring was introduced to an up-and-coming actress named Sharon Tate. Sebring and Tate immediately hit it off and began a romantic relationship. Tate was a frequent guest at Sebring's home. The fact that it was formerly owned by Jean Harlow fascinated her. She would tell friends and family that she could sense the spirits of Harlow and Bern around the house. On one occasion, when Sebring was out of town, Sharon asked if she could spend a night alone to see what would happen. That night would turn out to be a spine-chilling experience for the curious actress. While promoting her latest film, Eye of the Devil, in 1966, Tate was interviewed by journalist Dick Kleiner, who asked her if she ever experienced anything supernatural. Despite that the question was pretty bizarre, Tate was more than happy to tell of her night alone in the Harlow Bern home. In her story, she described that she normally wasn't frightened of the home, but that night she was. "I saw this creepy little man. He looked like all the descriptions I have ever heard of Paul Bern." Terrified of this apparition, Tate quickly ran down the stairs, where she saw a vision of a mutilated figure tied to the newel posts. The figure was slashed at the throat, with blood gushing out. Tate's experience of that night has gone on to be described as a premonition. After promoting Eye of the Devil, Tate then traveled to London to begin filming The Fearless Vampire Killers, directed by Roman Polanski. During the making of the film, Tate and Polanski began a romantic affair, and by the time filming wrapped up, the relationship became so serious that Tate moved in with Polanski at his London apartment. When J. Sebring got wind of the news, he flew straight to London to confront Polanski for stealing his girl. But instead, he and Polanski became friends, and he and Tate were just as close as they ever were before. Tate and Polanski were married on January 20th, 1968. A year later, the couple moved into their home on Cielo Drive in Benedict Canyon, not too far from where Sebring lived. The Polanskis were known to be generous hosts amongst their large group of friends. They even welcomed Roman's childhood friend Wojciech Kłodowski and his girlfriend Abigail Folger to move in with them. By August 1969, Sharon was 8 months pregnant. Roman was in London filming a new movie, but intended to return to LA for the birth of their child. In the late evening of August 8th, Sharon, along with Sebring, Kłodowski, and Folger, returned home at Cielo Drive after dining out together. Just a few hours later, the house was broken into by members of the Manson family cult. The next morning, the victims' bodies were discovered by the Polanski's housekeeper. Each of them had been stabbed numerous times. Wojciech Kłodowski and Abigail Folger's bodies were laid in the front lawn, while Sharon Tate and J. Sebring's bodies were left in the living room, tied together by a long rope. The horrific scene was eerily similar to the vision Tate had at the Harlow Bern home just a couple of years before. And just like Jean Harlow, Sharon Tate was only 26 years old at the time of her unfortunate death. A new family moved into the Harlow Bern home in the early 70s. Before the move was even complete, the spirits were already making their presence known. When Mrs. H was in the hall outside the master bedroom, she could sense someone behind her when a soft voice whispered in her ear, "Help me." There is also said to be distinct sounds of a woman sobbing around the home, and that in the children's bedroom, there's always a potent smell of a woman's perfume. Other activities include lights switching on and off in the different rooms, cold spots can be felt all over the home, and unexplainable drafts. And as with Sharon Tate, a spirit would come to them in a dream to warn them of an approaching danger. In the dream, there was a scene of the upstairs bathroom. The tub was full of bubbles when a decrepit hand slowly reached up from the water to switch on the light. At the touch of the light, the hand was violently electrocuted. Both Mr. and Mrs. H were disturbed that they had the same spooky dream. It was so real to them that they immediately called an electrician. Stunned by how outdated and dangerous the light switch was, the electrician instantly installed a new one. Because of the tragedies associated with the Bern Harlow home, many believe that it is cursed. But I can't help but notice that the spirits like to make themselves known when someone is in need of a warning. Perhaps they have taken it upon themselves to prevent others from facing a similar fate. Now it's time for the girls to have a ghoulie discussion.
Let's talk about scary things.
Okay, so I think this is a pretty interesting story. It's a pretty sad story because I think that Sharon Tate and Jean Harlow it's just sad that they lived really short lives because they had so much potential to make long-lasting careers.
Yeah, and I never realized there was a connection between them.
And she was so young, she wasn't even in her 30s, just like Jean Harlow, and when they passed, I'm like, oh yeah, that was one of the creepy parts of that story.
Because it shows different connections to people, like this one, they didn't have like real connection in life, but they had a connection spiritually, that's, I think, more significant than anything.
Do you guys think that was a premonition that Sharon Tate had?
Oh, yeah.
By herself?
I think very possibly could be. I believe in premonitions. I believe that, the spirit world, whether they're like have a personal connection to you or not, a lot of us get these, messages and gut feelings and premonitions a lot more than I think we realize. I think for the most part, we just think, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Having that premonition, if she had done something about it, could it have changed the course of her life?
Yeah.
Those are the type of things I always are very curious about. Why was she given the premonition?
She had such a vivid vision about her own death. And you just have to wonder also, would it have still happened? Was it predestined or not? Could she have prevented it?
Yeah, how could she have known that that's what was going to happen to her?
It's interesting because a vision like that can be very impactful on somebody's life.
And it's also believed that Sharon Tate haunts her house on Cielo Drive, so that'll be another interesting one to look into. It sounds like Sharon Tate was a lot into the supernatural herself, wanting to spend the night at the house by herself to see what will happen. She already had sensed the spirits of the house.
It sounds like she wasn't scared of whatever was there, so she definitely had a different understanding of energy.
Yeah, the movie with Hilary Duff, The Hauntings of Sharon Tate, is based on this incident where she had this, spiritual
interaction.
Interaction.
I had never been interested in watching that, but maybe I'll watch it now.
Yeah,
me too.
Because first doing research for this, it was just like, how do people know that Sharon Tate experienced this? Well, because it was actually published in a magazine article. It's a well-documented story, I guess you could say.
Yeah, those are the things. It's like you said, it's documented. So it is like Hollywood history, which is very interesting. We're intrigued by these people in general, and then you find out how some of them are intertwined after death, or even before death or whatever. It just, some of the experiences they have makes them seem more like you, because so many people do have these experiences, and when you realize these famous, they seem like so unattainable, it makes them feel a little more down to earth and relatable that they have these experiences just like everybody else.
Yeah, and it's also a bit of a true crime murder case intertwined with it too.
Yeah.
I knew that Jean Harlow was tied with one of her husbands died under unusual circumstances, but I didn't realize that she was initially thought to be the one that murdered him, and that MGM pretty much had to clean up the mess to make sure that it didn't ruin their greatest asset.
Yeah, I definitely didn't know that.
Other reasons why people think that the house is cursed is because, in addition to the apparitions and paranormal activity that we covered in the story, there were also 2 people that drowned to death in the pool of that house. Yeah, but that's part of the story of all the tragedies that are connected with that house. I think it sometimes starts with one tragedy and the energy kind of just sticks there.
You never know why there's so much negative energy in one place.
Yeah, the activity or apparitions that I definitely think are Jean Harlow are the sounds of the sobbing woman and the lingering scent of a perfume in the children's bedroom. She's definitely made her presence known in that home.
Well, coming from, it being a haunted home that has like a haunted history and, these famous people, the connection to that home, and then Harlow and Bern must have a very strong spiritual connection to be able to come through and, give like a premonition and, let their presence be known throughout the years.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you don't want to miss out on any of our latest Ghoulie Tales.